Friends, I want to talk to you today about something urgent, something that I believe with everything in me is the most overlooked reality of our generation. We live in a time when headlines change by the hour, when nations rage and shift and tremble, and most people scroll past it all without ever asking the one question that matters: what does this mean? Not politically, not economically, spiritually. What does it mean that the things written thousands of years ago by prophets who had no satellites, no internet, no access to modern geopolitics are unfolding right in front of our eyes in the very region where it was always said they would unfold? I want to walk through 5 signs with you today. 5 things happening right now in our lifetime centered on Israel and the Middle East that should make every one of us sit up and pay attention. Not with fear and panic. That is not what this message is about, but with sober readiness. Because that is the posture Scripture calls us to. Watch and be ready, not watch and be terrified. Watch and be ready the way a person waiting for a long expected guest keeps the house in order, keeps the lamp lit, keeps their heart prepared. The first sign is the simple, staggering fact that Israel exists at all. Think about this for a moment, because we have grown so used to it that we forget how impossible it actually was. A nation scattered to the 4 corners of the earth for nearly 2,000 years, without a homeland, without a unified language in daily use, persecuted across every continent, nearly annihilated in living memory, and yet that nation regathered. It rebuilt a homeland. It revived a dead language into the living tongue spoken by children in schoolyards today. No other people in human history has done this. No other exiled nation has returned after centuries, let alone millennia, and re-established itself in its ancient land. The prophet spoke of dry bones coming together, sinew and flesh forming, breath entering a valley of the dead, of a people gathered from the 4 winds and planted again in their own soil. We are not waiting for that to happen. We are watching the world in which it already happened and continues happening as Jewish people from Ethiopia, from Russia, from France, from Argentina, from every place under heaven, continue to come home. That alone should stop us in our tracks. But it is only the first sign. The second sign is the increasing isolation and gathering hostility of nations against this one small country. It is one of the strangest phenomena in modern geopolitics, if you stop to actually examine it. Here is a nation smaller than many American states, surrounded by neighbors many times its size and population, and yet it dominates international attention, debate, and condemnation in a way wildly disproportionate to its size. Ancient texts described a future where the nations of the earth would gather against Jerusalem, where all the peoples of the earth would be drawn into conflict over this one city, this one small strip of land. We see alliances forming today between powers that historically had little reason to cooperate, drawn together in a shared posture toward the Middle East. We see international bodies session after session devoting more attention to this one nation than to nations suffering far greater humanitarian catastrophes. Why? Why does the world fixate so intensely on this particular sliver of land? I don't think that's an accident of politics. I think it is a spiritual gravity, a pull described long before any of us were born, drawing the nations toward a final confrontation centered on Jerusalem. The third sign is the shifting alliances surrounding Israel from the north and the east. Coalitions of nations that, generation ago, would have seemed an unlikely partnership, now finding common cause, common military cooperation, common strategic interest, positioned in proximity to Israel's borders. There are ancient prophecies describing a great confederation, nations from the far north, joined by allies from other directions, moving toward Israel with intent to plunder and destroy. For most of history, readers of these texts had to speculate about who these nations even were, because the geopolitical map didn't yet match the description. Today, when you look at a current map of military cooperation, energy partnerships, and mutual defense interests among certain nations to Israel's north and east, the resemblance is no longer abstract. It is specific. It is current. Watching these alliances solidify in real time, watching former rivals find reasons to cooperate specifically in proximity to this region, is not something to dismiss as coincidence. It is a sign worth our attention. The fourth sign is the increasing centrality of Jerusalem itself in global affairs, particularly the unresolved status of the Temple Mount, that small plateau that has become perhaps the single most contested piece of real estate on earth. Three major faiths claim spiritual significance there. Every few months, world leaders make statements about it. Every diplomatic peace effort eventually circles back to it. The prophet spoke of Jerusalem becoming a cup of staggering to the nations, a burden too heavy to set down and too contested to resolve, language that describes exactly what we see. Every attempt at international consensus over Jerusalem ending in failure, frustration, and renewed conflict, while the city's symbolic and spiritual weight only grows heavier with each passing year. There is also the matter of preparations and renewed interest after centuries of dormancy in matters connected to the ancient temple itself. Discussions, planning, renewed religious and political attention toward the Temple Mount that simply did not exist with this intensity a generation ago. When something dormant for centuries suddenly stirs back to life in our lifetime, that is worth noticing. The fifth sign is the spiritual climate surrounding the region, what I would call a battle over truth and deception, playing out specifically through the Middle East conflict. We are told that as the appointed time draws near, deception will increase, that people will be told what they want to hear rather than what is true, that confusion will multiply even among those who consider themselves discerning. Look at how information about this region is reported, distorted, weaponized, and consumed today. Look at how quickly false narratives spread, how quickly truth becomes nearly impossible to discern amid competing claims, how social media accelerates confusion faster than any generation before us could have imagined. This isn't only a political problem. It is, I believe, a spiritual one, a fog deliberately thickening over the one piece of land that prophecy says will matter most in the final chapter of human history. Now, here is what I want to say to you about all of this, because I never want a message like this to leave you anxious or hopeless. That is not the purpose. The purpose of prophecy was never to give us a calendar we could mark off. It was given to give us confidence. Confidence that history is not spinning out of control, that there is a hand guiding events toward a purpose, even when the news cycle feels chaotic and frightening. When you see these signs, the appropriate response is not dread. It's the opposite. It's hope. It's the quiet steadiness of someone who knows in advance that the story does not end in chaos. It ends in restoration. So what do we do with this? First, we pay attention without becoming consumed by it. There's a balance here. Some people ignore prophecy altogether, live as though none of it matters, and miss the chance to recognize the times they're living in. Others become so fixated on identifying every sign that they stop living ordinary, faithful lives in the present. Neither extreme is right. We are called to be aware and to be faithful, both at the same time. Go to work tomorrow, love your family, pay your bills, serve your community, but do it all with eyes open, with a heart that says, I see what's happening and I'm not afraid because I know where this is going. Second, let this urgency move you toward people, not away from them. If you really believe time may be shorter than people assume, that should make you more patient with the people in your life, not less. More willing to mend a broken relationship, more willing to say the hard, true thing in love, more willing to share hope with someone who has none. Urgency that makes us harsh or self-righteous has missed the point entirely. Urgency that makes us gentler, more generous, and more outward focused has understood it. Third, let this be an anchor rather than an anxiety. The world will keep producing headlines designed to make you afraid. Algorithms profit from your fear, but you do not have to live gripped by it. You can watch the news, see the very signs we talked about today unfolding in real time, and still go to sleep at night with peace. Because your hope was never built on the next election, the next ceasefire, the next summit. It was built on something that doesn't shift with the headlines. I'll close with this. Generations of believers before us long to see what we are seeing. They read these same prophecies, prayed over these same promises, and went to their graves never witnessing a single one of these signs converge the way they are converging in front of us right now. We have not earned the privilege of living in this moment. We have simply been given it. So don't waste it on fear. Don't waste it on cynicism. Don't even waste it on mere curiosity, treating prophecy like an interesting puzzle to solve. Let it do what it was always meant to do. Wake you up, steady your heart, and turn your eyes towards something far more lasting than the news cycle ever could. Watch, be ready, and whatever happens this week, this month, this year, stay faithful in the meantime, because the meantime is exactly where most of life is actually lived. Let me keep going, picking back up right where the urgency of those signs leaves off, without tying it into a neat ending this time. There's something else I want you to notice about how these signs cluster together rather than appearing in isolation. It's one thing to point to a single trend and say, this could mean something. It's another thing entirely when 5, 6, 7 different threads, political, religious, military, technological, all start converging on the same small region in the same narrow window of time. That convergence is what should really get our attention more than any single data point on its own. Isolated events can always be explained away as coincidence. Convergence is harder to dismiss. Think about how unlikely it would be for any of this to happen by chance. A nation reborn after 2 millennia. That nation becoming the fixation of global diplomacy far beyond its size. Unlikely alliances forming to its north and east with growing military cooperation. Renewed religious tension over a single hilltop in Jerusalem that had sat relatively quiet for generations, and a fog of confusion and misinformation thick enough that even well-meaning people can no longer agree on basic facts about what's happening there. Each of those on its own might be written off as ordinary geopolitical drift. All of them together in the same lifetime, pointing at the same patch of land described in texts written thousands of years before any of these nations existed in their current form. That's not drift, that's design. I also want to address something I hear often from people who are paying attention to all of this, a kind of paralysis that sets in. If the picture really is converging the way it appears to be, what's the point of making plans? Why save for retirement? Why invest in a marriage? Why build anything long-term if the page might turn at any moment? I understand the impulse, but I want to push back on it gently. Every generation of believers throughout history has lived with some version of this tension, knowing the temporary nature of this current age, while still being called to plant gardens, build homes, raise children, and invest fully in the time they've been given. The right response to prophetic urgency has never been withdrawal. It's been the opposite. Deeper investment in the people and responsibilities right in front of you, precisely because you understand how valuable the time actually is. There's a phrase that gets used a lot in these conversations: no one knows the day or the hour, and it's often used to wave away the whole conversation entirely, as if since we can't know the exact date, we shouldn't bother paying attention to the season at all. But that's not quite right either. We're not told we can't recognize a season. We're told we can't pinpoint an exact day. Those are very different things. A farmer doesn't need to know the exact hour winter begins to recognize that the leaves are changing, the air is getting colder, and it's time to prepare. Recognizing a season and predicting an exact date are two entirely different exercises, and conflating them is how a lot of people talk themselves out of paying attention to something that deserves their attention. I'd also encourage you not to get distracted by the noise around the edges of this topic. The sensationalized headlines, the countdown clocks, the people who confidently name dates only to be wrong every single time and then quietly move on to the next prediction without ever acknowledging they were wrong. That kind of behavior has done real damage to how seriously people take this whole subject, and understandably so. But the excesses of a few loud voices shouldn't be allowed to discredit the actual substance underneath. The consistent, sober pattern of ancient texts describing a specific region, specific alliances, and a specific city lining up with what we're watching unfold on the news right now. Don't let the embarrassment of failed date setters talk you out of paying attention to a pattern that has nothing to do with dates at all. So let me bring this all the way home. We've walked through 5 signs today. A nation reborn against every historical odd, a small land carrying weight far beyond its size on the world stage, alliances forming in directions the ancient texts described long before modern maps existed, a contested hilltop in Jerusalem stirring back to life after centuries of quiet, and a fog of confusion thick enough to blur even the plainest truths. None of these by themselves would be enough to make a thinking person stop and take notice. But together, converging in our lifetime, in the very place where it was always said the final chapter would be written, that is not something we can afford to scroll past. Here is what I want you to walk out of this room with today. Not fear. Fear has never been the right response to prophecy, and it never will be. The right response is clarity, a clear-eyed recognition that history is not random, that the chaos on your screen is not the last word, that there is a steady hand moving all of this toward a purpose far bigger than any headline. You are not living in an accident. You are living in a moment that generations before you longed to see and never did. So go from here awake, not anxious. Go from here faithful, not frantic. Love the people in front of you a little harder tonight than you did yesterday. Forgive the grudge you've been carrying. Make the call you've been putting off. Live like someone who knows the ending of the story, because you do. The signs are not given to make us afraid of tomorrow. They are given to make us ready for it, and to make us grateful every single day we're given for the time we still have. Watch, stay ready, and whatever this week holds for you, walk into it with your eyes open and your heart at peace. That is the whole point of everything we talked about today.